Hi, everyone that's joining us. Just bear with us. We are just making this live to YouTube as well. And for anyone that is watching us on YouTube, there is a 20-second delay, which is actually longer than you think it is when we tested it the other day. So bear with us, and you can ask questions on YouTube, actually. Which is great. And so we have one of our colleagues, Evie's, monitoring that for me. So if you have any questions, you can put them there. And just wait for a few more people to join us here in the Zoom session, and then we're going to get going. All right, I think we're good to get started here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Friday Discovery session. Thanks for joining us. For those that don't know me, I'm Natalie Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement here at Efficiency Canada. For the next 45 minutes, sit back and enjoy learning, or take part in the Q&A discussion after our presenters, Brendan and James, go over the scorecard for the next 20 minutes. On that note, for those that are joining us for the first time, how this works is that we ask you to save your questions to the end, because there's typically enough time to get to all the questions after we hear from our guest speakers. So please join me in welcoming my two colleagues who authored the second Provincial Energy Efficiency Scorecard, Brendan Haley, our Director of Policy, and James Getty, Senior Research Associate here at Efficiency Canada. Thank you, Brendan and James, for joining me here today.
Thank you, Natalie. All right, well, I guess let's get started then. Okay, so as Natalie said, we're going to be presenting some of the top level results of our 2020 Canadian Provincial Energy Efficiency Scorecard. So quickly, what we're going to go through is I will briefly talk about the purpose and methodology of the scorecard. Then I'll look at some of the top level 2020 results from coming out of the scorecard. Then I'm going to pass it off to Brendan Haley, and he is going to go through the provincial highlights, province by province, and then back to me to quickly talk about our policy database that accompanies the scorecard. Okay, so first, let's look at the purpose of the scorecard and some of the high-level methodological changes we made this year. So what is the scorecard? Well, the scorecard is our transparent and evidence-based annual assessment of provincial energy efficiency policy frameworks across Canada. The report tracks both policy and outcome metrics. Outcome metrics are typically quantitative, such as how much energy savings have been achieved by energy programs. And policy metrics are more qualitative, looking at whether and to what extent a province might have an important policy in place to facilitate energy savings. For example, if provinces have energy rating and disclosure programs. The objective of the scorecard is to benchmark and to share best practices in energy efficiency across Canada. And we think that this is useful for both policymakers and local activists working in energy efficiency. We hope that the scorecard also promotes a little bit of healthy competition amongst the provinces to help build their overall energy efficiency policy frameworks and to achieve greater improvements in energy efficiency year after year. So the process of producing the scorecard is a year-long endeavor, and it begins pretty much right after we published the 2019. For this year, it began pretty much right after we published the 2019 edition last year. Excuse me. I don't know if you could hear that. My kids are doing virtual school on the house. This began with some internal planning and discussion around methodological adjustments back in December and January. And I'll discuss a few of those adjustments in the next couple slides. Next, we redeveloped our information request, which we send out to energy efficiency program administrators, utilities, and government departments across the country. The request is the primary source of the information that we present in the scorecard, but we do supplement it with some internal desk research and some data from Statistics Canada and Natural Resources Canada. So we sent that request out in April, and most of the information respondents were able to return it by mid-May. We then spent the summer compiling and analyzing this information and writing up the results. We were very helpfully assisted in this process this year by Madeline Chauvin, who was an intern that we hired for the summer through the Clean Foundations internship program. After the first draft was complete, the report was sent back to the information request respondents and peer reviewers, and then feedback and revisions were returned 3 weeks later. So then after we made the necessary corrections, the report went into its final stage before publication, which included proofreading, translation of some of the components, and formatting of the document. And now it's complete and it's ready to go. So let's look quickly at the methodological changes we made this year. So overall, the report scores provinces on 42 different metrics across 5 broad policy areas. Of these areas, energy efficiency programs is weighted most heavily since it's mainly composed of outcome metrics related to program savings and spending. This year, we moved our tracking of energy efficiency targets from the second section and enabling policies over to the program section, and we also introduced an Indigenous peoples program spending metric as well. And this year we also tracked non-regulated fuel savings like propane and home heating oil. And all in all, this made the program section increase by 5 points in weight. The next section is enabling policies. Those are policies that help put in place frameworks or the infrastructure necessary to achieve greater energy savings. Moving targets out of this section caused it to drop by 5 points. One moment. Okay, so next up is buildings. Weighting for the building section increased by 1 point due to the inclusion of a new metric that looks at provincial plans to update their building codes. Transportation looks at metrics largely related to personal vehicle electrification, and it didn't change in weight, although we did change one of the metrics to look at active transportation policies in the provinces. In total, and then finally, the industry section was reduced in weight by 1 point because we removed a metric that we tracked last year on combined heat and power. So in total, provinces still receive a score out of 100 points. But before we get to what those results were this year, I just want to say a brief word about how to think about the scoring. So the main thing to note about the scores is that they're not grades. Instead, we like to think of the scores somewhat like the various stages that a mountain climber might move through on their way to the top. So a score of 90 out of 100 is not equivalent to like an A+, and just as a score below 50 is not a failing grade. Rather, these scores are meant to show where along the path toward, peak efficiency a province is. Though all provinces have started the ascent, our scorecard shows that they're at various different stages, which we indicate by grouping provinces into tiers of 10. So provinces between 10 and 19 points, 20 and 29 points, and so forth. Okay, let's go to the results. Okay, so before we get to the actual scores, I just wanted to show some national savings and spendings figures. So this chart shows Canada-wide net incremental energy savings in petajoules for the years 2016, 2017, and 2018. We haven't included 2019 figures in the national results because not all program administrators were able to report them at the time that we produced the scorecard. So 2018 is the most recent year for which we have complete data, and in that year, Canada achieved nearly 24 petajoules of incremental energy savings. That's a bit of a drop from 2017, but we do expect that the size of this decrease will be reduced next year as some programs that were not fully evaluated will continue to be evaluated. So next up is a very similar looking slide that is showing Canada-wide program spending on energy efficiency programs. And you can see that in 2008, it's basically spending has grown since 2016, which we take to be a pretty encouraging sign. Continued growth in spending supports our expectation that savings for 2018 will eventually end up being higher than the data presently shows. But it also suggests that provinces may be taking deeper energy efficiency, or maybe going after deeper energy efficiency savings, savings that aren't quite as low cost as LED light bulbs or something, but will end up leading to larger and longer lived savings over time, like home retrofitting. Okay, finally, let's look at the provincial rankings. This is something that Brendan's going to go through in a little bit more detail, so I'm just going to whiz through it. British Columbia and Quebec retained their spots at the top of the rankings. PEI was the most improved. Alberta dropped 2 spots, and Newfoundland moved up from last place. This is a breakdown of the scoring by category. You can see like the darker shaded boxes is showing the province that's the leader in that category. So Prince Edward Island was first in the programs category, BC first in both enabling policies and buildings, and finally Quebec was first in transportation related metrics. We didn't highlight a leader in industry because many of the provinces were tied at about 6 out of 7 points. Okay, so that's it for my section. I'm going to pass it off to Brendan, who will talk about the provincial highlights.
Great. Thanks, James. So like last year, we've produced these one-page descriptions for each province. So that gives you a quick reference point. And even if you look into those one-pagers, there's links to the relevant tables in the report of what we're talking about. So I think that's pretty cool, and that helps you follow along. And in the report itself, the concluding section has detailed summaries for each province, which also goes into more detail about changes we've seen in the province over the year, as well as some relevant policy events, as well as strengths and areas for improvement that we talk about in each province. So I'm going to try and quite rapidly run through sort of the high-level stories for each province, but we can certainly discuss in more detail in the Q&A. So here goes. So in the first tier, of course, BC wins again. We're once again really highlighting BC's leadership in building codes because it's quite important for all the provinces this year. And that's because the new national model building codes for 2020 will be finalized soon. And these model codes will reflect the BC approach of having different performance levels moving towards net zero energy ready buildings. So we'd really like to see all provinces emulating and learning from the BC example. In BC itself, we're highlighting that this policy model that they've used to achieve the building code best practice in the country, that really had a number of characteristics to it, such as signaling a high standard for future mandatory regulations, coupling utility programs with market transformation objectives, enabling municipal leadership. And all those characteristics can be deployed now in other areas, such as building energy labels, building retrofits, and financing. So for Quebec next, it's probably not surprising that they lead in transportation. And just last week, or this week, I guess, they've taken even more steps on transportation, which we'll have to reflect next year. But one area of policy leadership that might not be quite as well known is the relatively comprehensive industrial programs in the province. And those industrial programs are largely responsible for the province's fairly high natural gas savings performance. One area we're highlighting for improvement is making the energy transition in Quebec more inclusive. So this year, James mentioned, we have a new benchmarking on Indigenous focused programs. We have a benchmarking on low income programs, and our benchmarking there shows a lot of other provinces are well ahead of Quebec in those areas. So if we move on to the sort of the second tier now. So with this tier, Nova Scotia and Ontario switched places this year. Nova Scotia is leading in areas such as electricity savings. They lead in areas such as trained energy efficiency professionals. Since the last scorecard, Nova Scotia has adopted a net zero emissions goal for the province. And really the history of policy leadership and energy efficiency that the province has, I think gives them a lot of those tools required to move forward in areas such as net zero building codes and electrification. James mentioned that we tracked activities to try to develop new building codes and try to adopt the forward-looking building codes, and Nova Scotia has already undertaken some activities to adopt more advanced building codes. So when it comes to Ontario, we're starting to see the influence of electricity program budget reductions, cancellation of electric vehicle incentives. We're starting to see that in the data we track. And we note that this could have a large influence on those overall national savings and budget figures that James was showing before, given the size of Ontario in our national economy. For opportunities, we're highlighting natural gas conservation. Our benchmarking shows, Ontario is already amongst the top provinces in natural gas and fossil fuel savings, especially if you look at the gross figures. But we want to remind the government of its own environment plan, which actually called for a major ramp up in natural gas conservation. And just this week, the Auditor General of Ontario released a report that we know actually used last year's scorecard and used some of our work on building code compliance. And they were making similar points. So next, since this is the second year we're producing the scorecard, we can talk about the most improved province. And this year, that title goes to Prince Edward Island. So PEI now has the largest per capita program spending. It's also quite far ahead in those metrics on low income and Indigenous program tracking that we have in the report. It places second in electricity and non-electric fuel savings benchmark. So this means that actually this year, PEI is not only the most improved, but they also narrowly beat out Nova Scotia in this year's section on energy efficiency programs. And the island could keep going. They have a climate plan that called for ramping up to savings equal to about 2% of sales, which is higher than any province in Canada right now, but consistent with what we see in leading American states. So if we go down to the fourth tier, that starts with Manitoba. This is the first year in Manitoba that the programs are now administered by Efficiency Manitoba. They have legislated targets, which is a best practice policy in our country. One area Manitoba could, I think, catch up quite easily is, again, building codes. They have a history of adopting new building codes. Support for that adoption is actually ingrained in the mandate of Efficiency Manitoba. Right now, they're under the 2013 version of the building code for large buildings. A natural place for them to improve is adopting the 2020 version of the codes when they come out. So New Brunswick is amongst all the maritime provinces, actually, that we've seen improvements this year amongst all those provinces. New Brunswick, we're seeing higher program savings. And we've also seen this year the province has adopted enabling legislation for a province-wide building code. I guess the paradox in New Brunswick is that even though we're seeing higher savings, we're seeing more energy efficiency professionals in that province, their savings targets have actually ramped down from what they previously were and are quite below some of the estimates of the efficiency potential in that province. So one way to ramp up these savings is, for instance, to boost low-income efficiency spending. Again, our benchmarking here shows that New Brunswick is quite behind some of the neighboring maritime provinces that are really leading the country in low-income energy efficiency. So the major movement amongst this tier is Alberta. Alberta is the province that has fallen behind the furthest in this year's rankings. Our benchmarking shows a quite dramatic decrease in program savings in 2019. So of course, this is the year that Energy Efficiency Alberta was shut down. But it also really seems like those programs were ramped down and canceled all throughout 2019, given that their savings performance. There is a bit of a hope here, however. I mean, just recently, the Federal Low Carbon Economy Fund was used to make investments in business energy efficiency through Emission Reduction Alberta. And that investment fits quite nicely with our federal policy recommendations. All right, next two provinces. So there's also been some movement here. Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador switched places in this final tier. So in Newfoundland, Labrador, we're starting to see some movement on electric vehicle charging, on policies to electrify public buildings that currently use oil. And those are both good ways for the province to basically start using this quite large hydroelectric surplus that they're going to have because of the Muskrat Falls hydroelectric project. And of course, if you're not aware, that's a project that has gone significantly over budget and is delayed. And one thing the province can do is really focus on efficient and beneficial electrification, and then use energy saving strategies to reduce peak loads, and also help those most impacted by electricity rates to grapple with the challenge that mega project has created for the province. So Saskatchewan this year just barely slipped into last place. There are efficiency programs in Saskatchewan operated by their electricity and natural gas utilities. But when we do our benchmarking on both programs and savings, they have some of the lowest investment levels in the country. Again, I will note some policy movements here that we're going to pick up in next year's scorecard that happened quite recently. Perhaps the main one is that Saskatchewan is now amongst the group of provinces that enables property assessed clean energy financing, right, through municipal property taxes. So next, I want to talk about ways the federal government can boost energy efficiency across all the provinces. And so this is another section in the report, and we're emphasizing 5 different areas. And we really want to talk about the scorecard. You know, it's an opportunity for you as citizens, for us as an organization, to all call for robust federal investments in energy efficiency to define our economic recovery. So the first priority is about using existing program delivery infrastructure to quickly create jobs and boost spending in local economies. So through our tracking, it's pretty clear that the Low Carbon Economy Fund has become fairly important for supporting energy efficiency portfolios in many provinces. That is an existing mechanism that can be ramped up, and we think it should be ramped up for Canada to try to achieve the same savings levels that we see in some of the leading American states. The second is the federal government can target deeper savings through financing strategies. So we're already seeing some movement here with the Canada Infrastructure Bank has released a growth plan that includes buildings. And this year's scorecard, we're also seeing many provinces enabling municipal financing strategies. And that's likely in reaction to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities residential financing program that was funded in the last federal budget. But we think the federal government can continue to do more here. They can co-finance and underwrite some of those existing residential initiatives, and they can help regional organizations develop investment-ready projects for Canada Infrastructure Bank investment. The third priority is about making the zero emission vehicle mandate a national policy. So the federal government now has targets for electric vehicles, for zero emission vehicles, but our scorecard, it's very clear that it's really only BC and Quebec that are on track to meeting those targets and those mandates. So we should see that policy go national. Fourth priority is again about new building codes. So as I said, national model codes will be finalized soon, we hope. And the federal government can spur provincial adoption of these codes by doing things like attaching conditions to funding, providing specific support for things like compliance tools and capacity building. And I really encourage you to check out some of the reports that we have on building code compliance and the building code process on our website. So the final thing we're emphasizing is industrial energy management systems. So there is a federal goal to see 75% of industrial energy use benefiting from energy management. Yet we would love to get data on this for our scorecard, but we can't. Data is not published. And we do know that some of the industrial programs that exist federally are oversubscribed and underfunded. So this is an area that we'd like to see get more attention and an obvious way to save energy. Okay, so that was hopefully a relatively quick run through. I'm going to hand things back to James, who's going to talk about our all-important policy database.
All right, thanks, Brendan. So I'm going to quickly talk about the policy database, and then we'll get to questions. So for those that aren't aware of it, our policy database is a companion product that we make available alongside the scorecard. The database includes the information we use to produce the scoring, as well as additional information that was not included in the report, such as an overview of cost-effectiveness testing used in each jurisdiction. And the idea behind the database is that it'll allow users to compare and contrast policy across Canada, and as well to inform policymakers and other interested parties about what each jurisdiction is up to. Users can access information either by policy area or by province. So in short, we see the database as a key tool for promoting and encouraging comprehensive and progressive energy efficiency policy in Canada. We hope that you also find the database to be an invaluable tool in your own lines of work and day-to-day activities. We do update the database periodically, not just around the scorecard. But if you happen to be on it and notice that information is out of date, or if you have any other questions or feedback about the database, how it might be improved, we welcome that feedback and encourage you to reach out and let us know. There is a contact form in the bottom, at the bottom of the website, or you can just email me directly. My email address is there on that slide. So please take some time to check out the database if you've not done it already, and let me know if there's more that you'd like to see here. And that is it. That's all I have for now. So that concludes the presentation, and I think now we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Brendan and James. As James said, we're going to open the floor to questions and discussion. Just a reminder, there are two ways to ask questions. The first way is to raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. The second, more popular way to ask questions is go at the bottom of your Zoom screen and there is a Q&A box and you can type your question in there and I will narrate it for you. And actually today we have a third way to ask questions, and that is for those of you that are joining us on YouTube. You can type your question in YouTube and our colleague Evie's monitoring there and she's going to send the questions to me so that I can ask them here. Just a reminder that there is a 20-second delay on that, so if I don't get to your question right away, it's coming. The only rule that we have is the same that we had for our presenters today and every week is no sales pitches, please. So without that, let's get started. We do have a question here, a few questions actually. One from Sherry Young is, did I miss how many organizations participated per province to establish the score? So I don't think there's a set answer to that, but that's not the first time we've been asked that. So
I think we can answer that, James.
Yeah,
I mean, in terms of who filled out the information request.
Okay, yeah. So generally speaking, it's somewhere in between 2 and 3 organizations per province. It depends on the province. But what will be covered is the large utilities. If there's like a third party or kind of separate organization that runs efficiency programs only, and then as well as any relevant government departments that might be involved in administering programs or developing the policies that we look at. So suffice it to say, it differs by province, but on average, I would say it's between 2 and 3 organizations per province.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that. I have a question here actually from Dave Stewart is, what is the strategy to get this information in the scorecard results to MPP, MLAs, MPs, etc.? So essentially elected officials or policymakers.
You can answer that one, Natalie.
So there's a number of ways. One way, and you guys can add on to this if you like. One way is that we have a fantastic communications team that's getting it into the hands of media stories, national, provincial, and local stories. That's actually really important because I know, for example, the Minister of Natural Resources gets news clippings from all the different his different portfolios every morning, and he'll get them in front of him. And so if there's anything on energy efficiency in the media, he will read it. So that is really important. So that is one way. The second way is we actually have meetings that we go to. So if you are interested in attending one of these meetings with us, we set them up. It's more so it's about probably 10, maybe 15 minutes where you meet with your local elected official, and you can just tell them your story and why energy efficiency is important to you, what it means to you and your family and your community, and then we kind of come in with this scorecard and the stats and figures and everything to back up what you're saying. So it's a dynamic, powerful duo that goes in to these elected official meetings and just really tell your story. And they really elected officials recognize the importance of energy efficiency and funding energy efficiency policies and programs, and why, when it comes down to voting, they should vote for energy efficiency. Brendan, I see. Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, everyone who's tuning in today, I'd really encourage you to just send a short email to your provincial representatives and even your federal representatives and say they should check out this scorecard. We really want this to be a tool for activists and for citizen engagement. You know, we know people in the sector use it for business intelligence and things like that, but you know, having a constituent send something to their local elected representatives is really useful. And I think next week we're actually coordinating a special discussion webinar on how people can use the scorecard as a tool for local activism.
Yes, through their advocacy sessions. That's a good point. So our colleague Kirsten actually is doing, she does advocacy sessions. They're probably about 30 minutes at most, including a Q&A period discussion. So a handful of people attend those each month. There's usually 2 a month. And this month is on the scorecard and how to use that. So that'd be a really interesting one to attend to see if you're even interested in using it. So if you have any interest at all or just curious, I encourage you to attend that. So we do have a question here from Joshua Kelly. Do these annual savings equate to a reduction in annual energy use, or does it track more to an energy intensity?
James?
I mean, I would say probably both, but it's definitely a measure of the reduction in energy use. So energy intensity is a slightly different thing that we don't look at directly in the report, although in theory, reduction in energy use, so long as there isn't like a drop in production, should be also improving energy intensity as well.
Thanks for that, James. I have a question here. Actually, we get asked this quite frequently from John Hudson here. Is just out of curiosity, are there any plans to add the Northern Territories to the scorecard in the future?
Thanks, Natalie. Yes, and we do. I mean, I should say that we do have some information on the territories in the scorecard, although there's several issues that has made it difficult for us to score them as we do for the regular or for the provinces. Although we do have plans to try to figure out a way to develop maybe a custom scoring methodology for the territories, just because it's a different energy system context, and some of the information that we would be seeking to get can be more difficult to acquire. Just before we should go, just one more thing on the territories. We were pleased to note this year that the Yukon government did return information to us, to our request. And so we were able to report some basic numbers for Yukon, which at least for energy efficiency program spending, would have put them, I think it was in the top 4 amongst the provinces for per capita spending on energy efficiency programs.
That's great. And all that information can be found in the database, right?
Yep.
Perfect.
Well, actually, I don't know if program savings or spending numbers are in there, but the database is more of a policy oriented thing, but you can definitely find it in the scorecard.
Perfect. Thanks, James. I actually have a question here. I'm just going to skip through a little bit of it. Do you compare, so I don't know if this one, it could pertain, so Brendan, I'm going to probably pass this off to you. Do you compare amongst the, not just the provinces, but taking into account international best practices, or you can maybe speak to, I'm going to kind of give you a hint of the answer. Do you know, are there any comparisons in North America or international?
Right, okay. Yeah, so the way we developed the scorecard is, as James mentioned, there's 42 separate metrics. So for each of those, metrics, we're trying to think through, what are the best practices? What are the highest levels that we see are actually achievable, or that are best practices in other jurisdictions? So that's why we talk about, that top score is kind of the top of the mountain. So a good example, and we adjust them. I mean, as actually, for example, Quebec has upped the game in terms of its zero emission vehicle mandate. So I think we're going to have to change the scorecard next year to provide a higher score to Quebec, right? But a good example of that is how we track program savings. And we look at that in comparison to what we see in sort of leading American states. So in leading American states, you see savings that are 2 to 3% of electricity sales, for example, consistently every year. No Canadian province is up to that, but that is our top sort of score. And on our website, you can find actually that using last year's numbers, that benchmarking on a North American level of those program savings, as well as targets.
Thanks so much, Brendan. I have another question here. Is actually a question from our YouTube live stream. Is I'm thinking of residential home solar systems and an EV. Should I wait to see what yesterday's announcement about zero policy brings from incentive programs?
I would say no. I think it would be best for you to start that planning right away. And a good place to start is with an energy audit. And I'm not too sure what jurisdiction this person would live in, but hopefully, outreach to your local utility or local efficiency program administrator, and you can develop a plan to do what's best.
That's great. And I know that my background working with Efficiency Nova Scotia, we used to get that call. The team there, the Energy Solutions Advisor, would get that call all the time when a rebate comes in and people have already bought a solar system, for example, or installed a heat pump. And the benefits of doing it early are that you start saving early. So you start saving right away versus waiting for an incentive. So I'd say, yeah. I would add to Brendan and say, so that's 2 of us saying, start now. And a question here from Sunil Gupta is, building benchmarking through Portfolio Manager has been growing. Number 1, how do we review / compare building performance across Canada? And 2, expand the benchmarking to non-participating regions. And 3, incorporate this in the federal scorecard. So building benchmarking through Portfolio Manager has been growing. So how do we review, compare performance across Canada, expand the benchmarking into non-participating regions, and incorporate it into the scorecard?
You want me to take that one, James? This is a policy scorecard, so we don't use the data that we might get from, Portfolio Manager to look at the actual performance of buildings per se. So what we do look at is more, are there policies in the provinces to promote participation in benchmarking type programs? So for instance, Ontario has a mandatory reporting policy. Several other provinces have more voluntary programs. Actually, this scorecard, we didn't do it, but last year's scorecard, we do have sort of more illustrative data that looked at the participation of commercial and institutional buildings in benchmarking programs in each province. Now, we couldn't score on it because the Atlantic region is kind of all amalgamated up into one place for commercial buildings, so we couldn't get data on each province. But that was pretty interesting to see just that participation data roughly, and Ontario was well ahead because they have a mandatory program. But certainly, I think getting data on just the performance of our building stock across the country is not easy. I mean, that doesn't exist. We haven't really found a way to look at that in any methodologically sound way. And as I said, this is focused mostly on policy. So we try to look at the policies that support the collection of that data in those benchmarking programs.
So just a quick question to follow up on that. Does this include municipalities as well in the scorecard?
No, it's just provinces. A good place to look at for some municipality benchmarking information is Quest. Has a municipal benchmarking tool. We do look at municipalities in the sense of how do provinces enable certain types of municipal action. So, for instance, the BC Step Code is a good example of a policy that enables forward-looking municipalities to adopt a more advanced code than the rest of the provinces. Or we have some good information in there about how some municipalities are adopting electric vehicle readiness into their building codes because of the way that provinces have enabled that. So we kind of touch on municipalities, but it's much more looking at the provincial level as an enabler.
And I'm just going to stop on one more question here, which I'll ask another one if you don't know the answer. But I have a question here from Kathleen is, how do you think the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Bill/Act will change things? I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that yet, because we've been pretty busy doing interviews for the scorecard this week.
Right.
So if you
don't have
an answer, that's okay.
I looked at it last night. I think it's good that the net zero emissions objective that the federal government has set for itself is more solidified, and that there's some accountability mechanisms around that. I mean, I did send out a personal tweet this morning, so this is my personal opinion, that was basically saying, we all know, that 2030 is just around the corner in policy terms, and to get to the type of targets we need in the next 5 to 10 years, we need a building code which is not watered down, like unfortunately it looks like the model national building code will be. We need provinces all adopting net zero building code standards. We need the retrofit rate to at least triple. So I'm we work on efficiency as a particular policy area, and to me, I'm kind of more interested in these particular policy areas and how we can ramp things up than sort of arguing over targets.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I kind of put you on the spot there, Brendan. But I thought I'd give you a chance to answer and share an opinion if you had one. Just so everyone knows, I'm going to put in the chat session here. I was asked by someone to add the advocacy session link to sign up. So I just added it there. It's also available. We'll share it on our social media channels as well as our website. So just before we finish for today, thank you again, Brendan and James, for joining us for the conversation and presenting some insights on the scorecard report. Is there any one last thing that you want to share with our audience here today? If there's one last message you could give them.
I hope James's kids are having a good time at school. That's the main thing. But just thanks everyone for tuning in. And we know the school scorecard has a lot of uses. We want it to be a tool for activists. We want it to be a tool for policymakers to look at best practices across the province to learn from each other. We know that people in the sector use it for market intelligence. So we really appreciate your interest in it, and would love to just get any feedback about how doing this work is helping you in your objectives.
Yes, please share any feedback with us. And James, is there anything that you want to add to that? Any words of wisdom?
No, I think, I mean, just to reiterate what Brendan said, I think that pretty much captures it. We're really proud of the scorecard, and we think it fills an important information gap in Canada. And, we find it very encouraging to find out that there's a lot of people interested to read it and to use it in their work. So that's all I would say. And thanks for attending and listening to our presentation on it.
Thank you again, Brendan and James. So for next week, I'm going to be joined from a speaker from Kembo Energy Group, along with Community Power, two organizations out west who are delivering energy efficiency in Indigenous nations. So tune in to learn how they work with collaborating with Indigenous nations, governments, and utilities to deliver meaningful community-wide reductions on energy bills and improve housing. I hope you join us, and I also hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, and I'll see you next Friday. Bye.